Hello and welcome to my channel. Now, I've been looking at Bible Floxbox's channel for quite a while now, trying to decide which of his videos to debunk first. When I stumbled on this one, I couldn't resist. This topic is very dear to my heart. I have 3 wonderful kids and I love children in general. I find the suffering and death of children to be abhorrent, especially when it's needless. Vaccines have been a great asset to public health, and the rise of the anti-vax movement is no less than a tragedy. So without further ado, Bible Floxbox.
At the making of this video, there is a fast-growing concern in the United States about getting vaccinated because a measles outbreak is occurring. The pressure is on to get vaccinated in order to stem this disease, and the mainstream media is pushing hard to convince people to get their shots, claiming they are safe and effective. There is also opposition to the anti-vax movement, which is practically being blamed for this outbreak.
The anti-vax movement is practically being blamed. Can you provide evidence that it's not to blame? Because I'm pretty sure that it is.
However, there are some facts about vaccines that the mainstream media isn't telling you, but that's not going to stop me from sharing them with you. These are 10 facts that vaccine companies don't want you to know.
Ooh, scary music. This is going to be good.
Fact number 1. Vaccine sales translate into big profits for vaccine manufacturers, making them billions of dollars each year. For example, the manufacturer Merck made $5.27 billion in 2012 from the sale of its vaccines.
Profits do not mean the company is evil. They also have huge amounts of losses from developing drugs that never make it through clinical trials. And even if every penny you spend on a vaccine is pure profit for the company, so what? Should you not buy groceries because the farmers and grocery stores make a profit from it? Probably shouldn't buy clothes either, or Bibles for that matter, as publishers make profit off their sales. Not to mention the pharmaceutical industry would probably make quite a bit more from selling drugs to relieve symptoms rather than selling vaccines that prevent them in the first place. Not to mention the drugs used to treat more serious diseases like smallpox. Remember smallpox? No? That's because it was eradicated by vaccines.
One of which includes Gardasil, an HPV vaccine which has been linked to side effects including multiple sclerosis and brain inflammation.
I couldn't find the case study that your source is referring to, as she said the names of the authors too quickly and with too heavy an accent for me to even guess at the correct spelling. The only case study I could find that linked MS to Gardasil only involved 5 patients. They contracted MS within 21 days of immunization. What your source declines to say is that the target population for the vaccine also has an inherently high risk for MS to begin with, and on top of everything, case studies are basically the bottom of the barrel when it comes to gleaning actual scientific data. I would also like to point out that the January 2015 issue of the Journal for the American Medical Association published a study examining the potential link between MS and other central nervous system diseases and Gardasil, and found no increased risk of MS or any other related disease. There was actually a higher risk of MS in the unvaccinated control group than in the group that received the vaccination. Now, does this mean that that Gardasil actually prevents MS? No. Not at all. No one that has any understanding of even the basics of statistics would begin to suggest that.
Fact number 2. Vaccines are not natural.
Well, duh. I wouldn't expect to get stung by a bee or something and end up immune to herpes.
Vaccines are a man-made drug with dangerous and toxic substances. Some of these substances include thimerosal, aluminum, formaldehyde, animal matter, and live viruses.
All of which can be found in nature, except thimerosal. But I'll wager that you're going to bring up methyl mercury when you discuss that, which does occur naturally, though it has nothing to do with thimerosal.
It is important to consider that every time you inject your child or yourself with a vaccine, you are actually putting a pharmaceutical drug into your body. Now I will give you some adverse side effects of some vaccine ingredients, starting with thimerosal, which is commonly found in the flu shot. Thimerosal contains mercury.
And there it is, folks, methyl mercury, which of course he's just calling mercury, ignoring the fact that there's a huge difference between methyl mercury and thimerosal.
Exposure to mercury can be particularly hazardous for pregnant women and small children. During the first several years of life, a child's brain is still developing and rapidly absorbing nutrients. Even in low doses, mercury may affect a child's development.
This is blatantly misleading. You're showing us a label for thimerosal, which is ethyl mercury, as can be seen clearly on the label that you're showing us. But you're reading a list of side effects of methyl mercury, which is an entirely different beast. See, methyl mercury is the one that occurs naturally. Thimerosal is man-made. So by your earlier logic, the one that you're reading about should be good for you. Ethyl mercury can take upwards of 6 months to metabolize, making it rather easy to expose yourself to toxic levels through repeat exposure. Thimerosal is metabolized much quicker than methyl mercury and is much less toxic to begin with. And as a side note, the WHO periodically reviews the safety of thimerosal in vaccines, even though it's already been extensively studied and found to be safe.
Delaying walking and talking, shortening attention span, and causing learning disabilities. Less frequent, high-dose prenatal and infant exposures to mercury can cause mental retardation, cerebral palsy, deafness, and blindness. In adults, mercury poisoning can adversely affect fertility and blood pressure regulation and can cause memory loss, tremors, vision loss, and numbness of the fingers and toes. A growing body of evidence suggests that exposure to mercury may also lead to heart disease.
Well, good thing we've established that you're not actually talking about the type of mercury that's in vaccines. That makes me feel a lot better.
Moving on to aluminum. Aluminum is a known neurotoxin that is contained in a number of common childhood and adult vaccines and may even exceed the toxicity of mercury in the human body. According to a study published in Current Medical Chemistry, children up to 6 months of age receive 14.7 to 49 times more aluminum from vaccines than the U.S. Food and Drug Administration safety limits allow.
I was unable to find any journal called Current Medical Chemistry. I did find one called Current Medicinal Chemistry, though. Is that what you meant? Now, the paper that Dr. McCullough is referring to is $63, and I really don't feel like shelling out that kind of cash just to show that he's probably misquoting something or taking it out of context, so I looked for other papers on the subject. What I found was that the aluminum present in vaccines is mainly responsible for one common side effect, local inflammation at the injection site. So why is aluminum in vaccines? It binds biologically active molecules, thereby reducing the severity of our body's reactions to those molecules. In short, it helps us not react to the vaccines.
The aluminum in vaccines carries a risk of autoimmunity, long-term brain inflammation, and associated neurological complications, and may thus have profound and widespread adverse health consequences. About formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is a known carcinogen, which can lead to cancer, organ failure, and even death. Some see a link between this and childhood cancers, including leukemias, which are blood cell cancers, and cancers of the brain and central nervous system, which account for more than half of the new cases of childhood cancers.
Are all of your side effects lists going to be for amounts far greater than what's actually in the vaccines? Yes, formaldehyde can be a nasty substance in large doses, but you will get more formaldehyde from a healthy diet than you will from a vaccine. In Canada, the highest amount of formaldehyde in any vaccine is 0.02 milligrams per dose. Compare that with the approximately 5 milligrams present in an average beetroot, or 8 milligrams in the average banana. If the side effects you are listing are from an amount present in the average vaccine, then my kids should have died from overexposure to formaldehyde long ago just from how many bananas they eat. Oh, and let's not forget that formaldehyde that is naturally produced in your body as a result of digestion. That's right, your own body manufactures this dangerous chemical.
Moving on to animal matter in vaccines. Some vaccines are derived from live hosts including cows, monkeys, pigs, and chicken embryos, which result in foreign DNA being injected into our blood. This has the possibility of altering our own DNA structure.
I haven't found any credible sources that say there's actually a risk of altering our genes just from having foreign cells injected in us. It's a bit far-fetched for anyone who understands basic biology. After all, we eat animal and plant products every day, and they don't alter our genes, but they all have foreign DNA. I did, however, find that the sources you listed were usually authored by people that either have very little in the way of credentials or were working outside of their field of expertise. In all cases, they've been largely discredited by actual scientific works, and in some cases you can discredit them just by checking their sources.
And no one is sure what impact that has on our health. Not to mention, animal viruses can be passed on to humans in this manner. In the early 1960s, it was discovered that some lots of polio vaccines manufactured on rhesus monkey kidney tissue during the period of 1955 to 1963 were contaminated with a monkey virus called SV40. This primate virus was quickly proven to cause various cancers in experimental animals. However, to this day, U.S. government officials still insist there is no absolute proof that SV40 causes human cancer. Despite the lack of government interest in SV40 in human cancer for 3 decades, genetic and immunologic studies by independent researchers over the past decade indicate this virus is clearly associated with human cancer, such as rapidly fatal cancers of the lung, bone marrow cancer, brain tumors in children, and other forms of cancer.
Science doesn't deal in absolute proofs, just evidence. And the evidence is very divided in this case, with some studies showing a connection and others showing no connection at all. We can't say for certain, and usually in cases like this where the studies are divided both ways, it means that the connection, if it exists, is negligible. And this event is one of the reasons why the animal matter used in vaccines today is so diligently checked for any contamination.
About live viruses and vaccines. Live viruses and vaccines have been shown to cause brain damage over a prolonged period of time, and it's possible that the existence of live viruses in a vaccinated person can cause that person to become contagious and spread that disease to other people.
Live viruses are used in some vaccines in the case where killing the virus will essentially cause the vaccine to have little to no effect. The viruses are weakened to a point where they reproduce very slowly, allowing your body's immune response to take care of them and learn what they are in order to produce the relevant antibodies. Some live virus vaccines do shed, but the version of the virus that is shedding from them is the weakened version, and you would only have to worry about it if you were, say, visiting someone in a hospital that is so far along in an immunocompromised condition that they were being kept in a sterile room.
These are just some of the potentially harmful ingredients in vaccines. Fact number 3. Vaccine companies are protected from lawsuits against injuries that vaccinations cause. Parents cannot directly sue vaccine makers for health problems that arise in their children after they receive injections. In 1986, Congress passed a law protecting vaccine manufacturers from liability. Instead, a vaccine court has been established to compensate individuals who have been injured by vaccines. According to the Health Resources and Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, from the fiscal year of 1989 through 2014, there have been a total of 3,484 compensated claims and 9,713 dismissed claims. These were people left to suffer without any recourse, and those compensated for vaccine injuries were rewarded over $2.5 billion in damages. Most of these rewards resulted from claims against injuries caused by the flu vaccine. There have also been over 80 cases of autism among those compensated for vaccine-induced brain damage.
I like that you go into great detail about why the dismissed cases were dismissed and why the other ones were deemed compensable. I also like that your source doesn't actually have a source for that. It's a link that leads to a page not found error. But that's beside the point. Vaccines do have very real side effects, and while parents should be aware of these, they should also know that they are incredibly rare. So I'd say a 3-to-1 ratio of paid out claims is pretty generous, especially considering you mentioned that at least some of the payouts were for a disorder that has been shown time and time again to have no connection whatsoever to vaccines.
Fact number 4. Most of the so-called reliable research on vaccines is tremendously biased. Much research is sponsored by vaccine manufacturers and public health bodies who have financial and bureaucratic interests that could impede the objective study of vaccine safety. These companies and agencies adamantly deny a link between vaccines and autism and argue that vaccines are one of the most important innovations in disease reduction in the 20th century. There are no requirements before FDA approval and licensing that a vaccine undergoes independent studies by researchers with no vested financial interests and industry ties in order to validate a vaccine maker's claims. Rather, the entire approval process is nothing more than a good faith relationship between the vaccine industrial complex and the FDA and the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practice, the primary entity determining vaccine policies. To add to this, in 2011, Dr. Paul Thorsen, whose research known as the Danish study, which is quoted extensively to debunk the autism vaccine connection, was indicted on charges of wire fraud and money laundering for allegedly concocting a scheme to steal more than $1 million in autism research money from the Atlanta-based Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
My main problem with your argument here is that you're claiming that publicly funded research is also in conflict. Who else would you expect to pay for the research? Would you expect Toyota to fund the safety testing for Honda cars? I don't see a problem with public money being used to test vaccines. It seems to be the best way to avoid conflict of interest. And anyways, it's much more profitable for a vaccine company to produce a shot that actually works and doesn't have any adverse effects linked to it, as that link would surely be discovered in the long run and wind up costing the company billions in class action lawsuits. Yes, even if it was filed in the vaccine court. And with regards to Dr. Thorsen, it doesn't matter. For one, he was stealing money. That's it. It didn't affect the papers. He was a relatively minor contributor to both of them anyways. And even if he had falsified data, like the only paper ever to find a connection between vaccines and autism, this just represents 2 studies out of multitudes that show no connection.
Fact number 5, there is no evidence that proves vaccines actually work because there are no long-term, double-blind controlled placebo studies for any of the pharmaceutical industry's vaccines. The best and most reliable form of research is the double-blind, placebo-controlled study. A treatment cannot really be said to be proven effective unless it has been examined in properly designed and sufficiently large studies of this type. An example of this type of study would be to take a group of people and give some of them a real vaccine and some of them a placebo. Then they would all be exposed to the disease the vaccine is meant to protect against in order to see how well the vaccine actually works compared to the group that takes the placebo. Nothing like this has ever been done with vaccines.
You honestly don't see the problem with that? Really? Let's take a bunch of kids, give some of them an actual polio vaccine, some of them a placebo, then expose all of them to polio. Sure, about 2 to 5% of the control group kids will die, but we need a double-blind study. This is unethical. Really, really unethical. There are some times when a double-blind study is definitely not recommended because of situations like this where it'd be unethical. Like, for instance, car seats. There's never been a double-blind study on whether or not car seats save babies' lives in accidents, because it would be really unethical to stick a baby in a seat not buckled up to see whether or not he'll die.
Yet, that doesn't stop the mainstream media from reporting that people who get the measles vaccine, for instance, only have a 1% chance of getting the disease compared to a 90% chance if not vaccinated.
Statistical analysis is what is used to reach these numbers. Very, very detailed statistical analysis. Not to mention the rigorous process that a vaccine goes through just in being developed. Before it can even make it to human trials, it has to show that it works in a test tube, and then it has to show that it's safe in lab animals. And then with the human trials, they start with small numbers, about 10 informed consent volunteers. Then they slowly use bigger and bigger sample sizes to continue to show the safety of the vaccine. This process takes years, and they wouldn't bother paying for this expensive research if the vaccine didn't work in the first place.
Not to mention, there have been reported outbreaks of diseases in communities where the majority of the residents have been vaccinated. For instance, from October 1988 to April 1989, a large mumps outbreak occurred in Douglas County, Kansas. Of the 269 cases, 208 occurred among primary and secondary school students, of whom 203, that's 97.6%, had documentation of mumps vaccination. So in this case, nearly everyone who got the mumps vaccine contracted mumps anyway.
No, it doesn't. It means that of the people who contracted the mumps, 97.6% of them had been vaccinated. Not that 97.6% of vaccinated people contracted the mumps. Huge difference. Also, if you read to the end of the abstract, you'll notice that it says, and I quote, students who had documentation of receiving only 1 dose of vaccine were at greater risk than those who had received 2 doses. Overall, vaccine effectiveness among Douglas County junior high school students was estimated to be 83%. These data suggest that mumps vaccine failure and the failure to vaccinate have contributed to the relative resurgence of mumps observed in the U.S. since 1986. The recent change in immunization policy to recommend a 2-dose schedule of MMR vaccine should help reduce the occurrence of mumps in highly vaccinated populations. This is a problem with anti-vaxxers. The only time they have actual scientific sources, they only read the bits that look bad without trying to understand the reasons behind any of it. You had the answer displayed right in your own video for this one.
Fact number 6, there has been over a 400% increase in vaccinations given to U.S. children since 1950. In 1950, your child would have received 7 shots by the age of 6. That number has skyrocketed to 49 doses today.
Well, once again, if you read to the end of the bit about the failure of the MMR vaccine, you would have noticed that one of the reasons for failure was that a good chunk of the population had not had a booster shot. Recommendation? Give booster shots. Improve the effectiveness of the vaccine. Is it any surprise that as time went on, this kind of data emerged? Not to mention the development of new vaccines. I remember having chickenpox as a kid. My kids are vaccinated against it. The vaccine was not available to me as a child, or I would have been vaccinated against it, and it would have either not had it or had a very mild case of it. And I can expect that my kids will either not get the chickenpox thanks to the vaccine that they received, that I did not, or if they do get it, it will be an incredibly mild form of it.
Fact number 7. Vaccines are not responsible for decreasing diseases after their introduction. According to the World Health Statistics Annual 1973 to 1976, Volume 2, there has been a steady decline of infectious diseases in most developing countries regardless of the percentage of vaccines administered. Researchers pointed out that infectious diseases disappeared as the result of sanitation, improved public water supplies and personal hygiene, better distribution and increased consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables. From 1850 to 1940, diseases had declined 90% and were at an all-time low just when vaccines started to be introduced.
All of those graphs, except for the Canadian measles one, are of death rates, not infection rates. It's a bit dishonest to say that the diseases themselves were in decline, and then show graphs of the death rates, not of the infection rates. Wouldn't you expect that with the advances of medicine between 1900 and 1950 that death rates would drop, even if they didn't know how to stop it from spreading? Just as an example, here's a chart that shows actual infection rates. Notice how the rate is staying quite high between 400 and 800,000 per year until the vaccine's introduced. Then it drops off a cliff to stay consistently below 100,000 per year.
Fact number 8. Unvaccinated children report having significantly better overall health than vaccinated children. In December 2010, a survey was initiated by vaccineinjury.info to compare the health of vaccinated children with unvaccinated children. To date, over 7,850 surveys have been submitted, and the findings have been published in this chart, which reveals kids given vaccines have 22 times the rate of ear infections, 32 times the rate of sinusitis, 4 times more allergies, 2 times more asthma, 4 times more hay fever, 3 times more ADHD, and 19 times higher odds of autism.
I'd like to know why they're focusing on German children. Was that the only place where data was available? Because a quick Google search will yield the relevant data for most developed countries, so why all the German children? Could they be cherry-picking data, perhaps? I notice that the prevalence in vaccinated children is all about the Germans, but no such distinction is made for the unvaccinated children. Also, even if there was a link between any of these items, which there isn't, most of the conditions listed are definitely preferable to, say, polio.
Fact number 9. Many people believe that sudden infant death syndrome is caused by vaccinations. The internet is full of stories of children who died shortly after receiving an injection. One story from thinktwice.com reads as follows. Our beautiful daughter was born on February the 14th and died on April the 17th. What was unusual was that earlier on the day she died, I had taken her to the military base hospital for her 2-month checkup. The doctor told me that she was just perfect. Then the doctor said that she needed 4 shots. I said, 4? She assured me that it was completely normal and that it was better to give her all the shots at such an early age because she wouldn't remember the shots. That evening, after feeding our daughter, we laid her down to sleep and checked on her 45 minutes later and discovered her dead. I told the police, coroner, and investigators that I thought it was the shots because she was perfectly fine that day and before the shots. But after 3 weeks, we finally got the answer from the autopsy that it was indeed SIDS. To this day, I believe that it was the shots, and no one can convince me otherwise.
SIDS is always tragic. I have 3 young children. I'm not sure how I would have coped if any of them had been taken from me by SIDS. But while SIDS is not fully understood, there is no link between it and vaccines, other than sometimes they happen around the same time. Correlation does not prove causation. Just because a case of SIDS happens after a vaccine does not mean that it was caused by that vaccine. SIDS has been studied extensively, and while the exact cause remains unknown, there are several statistical risk factors, none of which involve vaccines.
Fact number 10. The highest rates of unvaccinated people are among the rich and informed.
So what you're saying is if I want to be rich, don't vaccinate my kids? Yes! I just found the secret to easy money! Actually, I think more research needs to be done on this, but my guess would be that a rich family would be more likely to pay someone for pseudoscientific nonsense, like an alternative medical practitioner or something. And your language is a bit deceptive there. It isn't more informed, it's more educated. More education doesn't mean more scientific literacy. A degree in business management doesn't give you what you need to understand molecular biology. Now, how many molecular biologists refuse vaccines, I wonder? That'd be an interesting question. I would love to see the answer to that.
These 10 facts that vaccine companies don't want you to know